Welcome back to Families in Action here on KHTS, AM 1220, your hometown station, with our special guest, Dr. Darren Privet. We're talking about the immature teen brain on pot.
Immature teen brain. We got these, I mean, I laugh, it's so disgusting. How old does a child have to be before their brain's developed?
In their 20s.
In their 20s, right?
In their 20s.
It's like their mid-20s. So you got these kids now that are 12, 13, 14, 15, and they're smoking pot. Now, marijuana, and you can jump in anytime you want,
Sure.
has a 7-day half-life.
Yeah.
That means in 7 days, half's gone. The other half is storing in their fatty cells. Where are their fatty cells? We have a doctor here. Everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah. Adipose is all over in your skin.
The brain, your heart, your sex
Everywhere.
organs.
All the organs, everywhere.
Everywhere. So you got these kids that are starting to smoke pot. What part of their brain's not developed? The decision-making part.
Yeah.
So it's storing in here, and here's what I see. I've been treating people for 30 years when it comes to substance abuse. First thing that happens to these kids is they start losing their motivation, meaning school's not that important. If they're in sports, they don't really care about it anymore. Baseball, why don't you want to go? It's boring. Dance, I'm so tired, I'm bored. So then you start getting what you call short-term memory loss. Why didn't you do your homework? I forgot. Why didn't you turn in your homework? I forgot. That kind of stuff, and then it becomes longer term. And then we talk about drugs, and we're going to just play with this for a second, then we'll talk more about the kids and the teen brain. Nobody decides to wake up and be a crystal meth addict. Nobody decides I'm going to wake up and shoot heroin. Nobody says I'm going to go rob the pharmacy so I can get my dope. All substance abuse starts innocently. It really does. And when we're young, we all have what I call contracts. When I grow up, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a radio host, or whatever the deal is.
Right.
We have these sets of contracts.
Yep.
Then we have another set of contracts. When I grow up, here's things I'll never do. And I'll tell you what, almost every kid, I'll never smoke cigarettes. Why? Because it says it on the box, they're going to kill me. We teach people when they're in elementary school, cigarettes causes cancer. Not maybe. In fact, what it says on most cigarette boxes now is this. It says, warning, the Surgeon General has determined, it doesn't say might anymore, that smoking causes, it doesn't say might, lung cancer, emphysema, and all that kinds of stuff. This is for the parents. When I'm doing speeches at schools, and we're talking to the kids that are in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, when we're done talking, we tone our speeches down
Sure.
to self-esteem, and you know.
You want to educate, not fearmonger.
Exactly.
Even though we really want to fearmonger.
Yeah, because we need to hardwire those contracts.
Sure, absolutely.
But when I'm done speaking, here's what the kids say to me. They start crying. There's always 3 or 4 kids crying, and they're saying, is my parents going to die? They're smoking cigarettes.
Yeah.
Very frightening.
Sure.
So we have these contracts, I'll never get loaded, I won't smoke cigarettes, and here's the deal. There's only 2 reasons. Almost every addict that I have ever met started with a cigarette. That was the first contract they broke. And
Yeah.
there's only 2 reasons an individual would smoke a cigarette today. 2, not 3. 1, they think the cool kids are doing it. So
Yep.
there's peer pressure.
Huge peer pressure.
Yeah. The next is it's a learned behavior from home.
Yep,
Mom,
absolutely.
dad, brother, sister, right?
Yep, absolutely. And you brought that up, you know, the parents have such a huge key component in this. You know, you can't emphasize enough. You have a large group of parents who are focused on that and define what that contract is.
Mm-hmm.
And you have another set of parents who unfortunately just do not, or enablers, and just do not set the right tone in the home
Right.
or the example.
Or the example, they come home and have a glass of, or 3 glasses of wine and take 3 Xanax or smoke 15 cigarettes. I mean, what message are we giving our kids?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the deal is, so the kid says to himself, I'm not going to do it, starts hanging out with Joe and Bob and Paul and Mary and everyone else. Somebody says, you want a cigarette? Most kids say no, because it's a contract they made. But as they're hanging out more and more with these kids, they're getting what I call desensitized.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just a matter of time. Somebody says, here, and it's on. So they take their first hit. What did they do? They just broke a contract they made when they were 7 or 8 or younger. So how do they clean that contract up? It's simple. It's only a cigarette. I'll never smoke pot. And they mean it. But they're still hanging out with everybody else. And how we are so lax about marijuana today, it's just a matter of time before somebody says, hey, Mike, try this.
Yeah.
No, it's a drug. Oh, it's not a drug. It's only pot.
Yeah. And you know, that is actually the funny you bring that up, because that's going on a national wide, an emergency. Here is that cigarette use has actually declined, but marijuana use has increased.
Because of our thinking.
Yep.
So what happens then is we take our first hit. It's only pot. How do they clean that up? It's only pot. I'll never use hard drugs.
Right.
All the other drugs are what you call drugs of opportunity. They're just waiting.
Mm-hmm.
So little Johnny's 14, 15 years old. He goes to a party. He's smoking a little bit of pot. He's starting to get high. Somebody says, have a drink. He says, oh, it's only alcohol. He starts drinking. What's the first thing that happens to somebody that's smoking pot and drinking? They lose their reasoning to what? Reason.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't have a lot of reasoning to begin with.
Right.
Because their brain's not developed
Right.
yet.
Yep.
So somebody says, try this. No. Here, have another drink. Here, try this. Okay. And then we're off to the races because they just tried something that made them feel different and better than anything they've ever have felt before. And then I get them. They come to the rehabs. Or you get them. They come
Right.
to the ED
Very
because
true,
of,
yeah.
I mean, how many overdoses do we deal with at Henry Mayo?
And that number has been actually fairly steady, but it's in the hundreds. We deal with that probably 200 to 300 times a year.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it is. It is crazy. And speaking about teenagers and adolescents, these patients will come in, and if my child was in there and underwent that, I'd be all over my kids. They'd be in so much trouble. I don't think they know what it would they were in store for. And most of these parents come in and they're just, it's insane,
I know, yeah.
how enabling they are, and they're not upset. And I understand, I mean, it's hard to define what love is for some person and how they go about expressing that, but there's got to be a harder line. And that's a whole other topic about parenting, and I think that's a large problem that we deal with.
That's a huge problem that
Yeah.
we're dealing with. I've been into the ED doing interventions on people where they're lying there with tubes and holes
Yeah.
and ready, just about dead, and they said, oh, it was an accident, they'll never do that again.
Yeah,
Like, come on.
absolutely.
They're almost dead.
Yeah,
But we want so much to believe our kids aren't going to be like that.
yeah.
It was just a one-time thing. You should be admitted to the psych ward if you believe that. This is Families in Action on your hometown station, AM 1220 KHTS. We're coming back.
Welcome back to Families in Action with your host, Cary Quashen. I'm Mike Doherty, your co-host, and today our special guest is Dr. Darren Privet from Henry Mayo's Emergency Department.
He got it right. We can give him back his Emmy.
Yeah, he did. We'll give it back the
Got my Emmy? Okay.
Just
Yeah, you guys had a hostage here for 20, 30 minutes. We're talking about the immature teen brain on pot. And Dr. Privet, what are we talking about when we say the immature teen brain? What's going on there? I mean, physically.
Well, obviously the body's still developing, and when you think about the brain, it's still evolving and developing. And when you think about drugs in general, where are these drugs being absorbed? And Cary talked about that earlier, that it's, the half-life of the drug is being stored in the fat cells. But when you think about immediately when you take drugs, where are the centers that it affects? And primarily it affects the brain. It gets uptaked into the brain and it affects these neurons. And specifically, when you think about where these drugs are absorbed, you're looking at the what's called the hippocampus, the thalamus, the limbic system, and those are the main centers that we talked about earlier that affects the reasoning, the decision making, the cognitive function, and the emotional aspect. And those are the four main centers that are being affected here.
And we're not talking about something that's short term. We're talking
No.
about something that can literally last a lifetime.
Absolutely.
So here's the problem. When we're dealing with clients, patients,
Sure.
residents, whatever you want to call them,
Right.
and they come in and they're on cocaine or heroin, and
Right.
we say, you're ruining your life, they always say, you're right.
Yeah.
When somebody comes in there and they're chronic pot smokers and we go, you're ruining your life, they go, huh?
Right.
How do we get past that?
That's a
That's
good question.
the hardest part of treating an addict
Yeah,
right now.
and I think it probably starts with this grassroots movement, kind of what we're doing right now. It's all about education. And you said that earlier, education is power.
Yeah.
It starts in the home, starts with parents, and then, it takes, unfortunately, a village to raise a family.
But you just said something I want to jump into really
Yeah.
quickly. It starts at home. It starts with parents.
Yep.
Here's the problem with today is so many parents give up when it comes to marijuana. They don't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
They're just figuring it's a rite of passage and my kid's going to do that. And I'll tell you what, if you believe that, you got real problems coming.
And that's the thing, too. And I think, most of us try to say, well, just let them try it once. Let them experiment. And that's the key, is that this brain is developing.
Right.
And once you take it once, you can cause change in those neurons, a change of that brain tissue that may not revert back to its normal process. You might, have a permanent brain structure that's changed, and you might never get back just from experimenting.
But how do you get parents to believe that? How do you get anyone to believe that? It's only pot. It's not bad.
Great question, and we probably could make a lot of money if we could figure that out.
We sure could.
Because social
and help a lot of people.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it does take a village to raise a family. So we're trying to do what we can right now, in the community point of it. But unfortunately, social media drives a lot of influence, especially among teens, and the message is not portraying that.
We were talking on break about the new surveys that came out. Want to talk about that?
Sure. There was a new study that came out in a psychiatric journal that was saying that actually marijuana does not have any short-term or long-term effects. And which is common in the medical community. There was a journal that came out in the neuroscience literature that says absolutely false, that there is a significant amount of damage and change that happens in the short term and in the long term effects of smoking marijuana.
Which we see all the time.
Right. We know that, which is true in the medical community.
Yeah.
On the neuroscience side of it, we certainly see that there's a problem. So, and sometimes these studies are flawed. I mean, you got to take it for what it's worth. You got to look at the patients they were looking at, how many patients were actually in that study.
Right.
But the media, you say one word about something and they just run with it.
It goes crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do a lot of media stuff, and they call me on stuff that maybe happened once in some other state and never again, but everybody's jumping on it.
Absolutely.
So you never know really what they're talking about. But the hard thing is to really teach people. People got to learn the real dangers of stuff. Here's what I got. I get phone calls. I deal with people with substance abuse all over the place, and I get phone calls from Simi Valley Police Department a couple weeks ago, and they're saying, have you seen the same thing I'm seeing? I say, what are you seeing? We're picking up many people on the streets that are psychotic. We're admitting them to psych units and having to arrest some of them, and the only thing showing in their drug urinalysis is THC.
Yeah.
So, and we're seeing that.
Right. And there are some synthetic drugs that sometimes aren't picked up on the drug screens that we have, because the drug screens are pretty simple unless you're looking for something specific. Then you can send a send-out test. But and those drug tests are actually available for anybody. You can go to any drugstore and get those.
Well, we could test at Action for any drug. Synthetic. We can even go back and check alcohol for 3 days now.
Wow, that's great.
So yeah, there's all kinds of tests. But we're actually really, I'm dealing with a lot of people that really only smoke pot.
Yeah.
And they're really showing some serious psychosis right now.
Right. And that defutes the whole thing that pot's not that bad, because you see that.
I see it.
We see that on a day-to-day basis. You're
but people don't
right.
believe us.
Right.
They don't believe us. They say, you're wrong.
And it's funny because you see things, for instance, like, why do you use this medical marijuana? Why have really bad anxiety? And they're in the emergency room for severe anxiety.
Exactly.
They're having the complete opposite effect. And we actually have seen a huge new syndrome that's developed from marijuana users, specifically younger adults. There's a whole thing called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, where they use marijuana and they get this cyclic vomiting. They can't stop vomiting.
Wow.
And marijuana is supposed to be a treatment for anti-nausea medication, but it's developed this whole new syndrome because of that.
Yeah, and a lot of people that are extremely, we see them in the behavioral health and extremely depressed.
Yeah.
And they're smoking a lot of pot. Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and and quite frankly, the FDA has not even approved a specific indication for medical marijuana.
Right.
Yeah, but we try to use it for everything.
Yeah. Well, we want magical cures here.
Yeah.
We want the magical drug, and that's marijuana, isn't it? No, it's not. This is Families in Action on your hometown station, AM 1220 KHTS.